Welcome back to the Holding It Together Kinda podcast. I'm your host, Michael Macniak, and today we're talking about a group of people we supposedly hold in the highest of all regards, that is, our veterans. But there's a new policy coming out of Washington that suggests we might be ready to thank them all for their service by taking away their right to choose where they live. The headlines are calling this Project Safe Harbor. It's a new partnership between the Trump administration, the Department of Justice, and the Veterans Administration. On the surface, it seems compassionate and like it's a great idea. They say they're looking for a way to help veterans who are quote unquote stuck in hospitals or on the streets because they're lacking the capacity to care for themselves and they have no families to step in. So the solution they came up with is this concept of mass legal guardianships. So as an attorney, working for 30 years in the probate court systems, working with mental health issues, and as somebody who has worked with hundreds of people, thousands of people around conservatorship issues, and still does, this makes my hair stand up. Even though I don't have any hair, it makes it stand up anyways. I know what guardianship looks like when it's done right. It can be a really good clinical tool used with a scalpel, so to speak, to protect someone's life and their interest. But when you hear that the federal government is talking about a broad initiative to clear the streets, this isn't a scalpel, this is a sledgehammer. Today, we're going to dissect a New York Times article on this policy. We're going to talk about why homeless doesn't mean incapacitated, why the VA is claiming that they lack authority to get involved in these matters, which is legally questionable, and why this ghost of the 1980s Reagan-era deinstitutionalization is haunting this entire conversation. Is this really about care, or is it about making a perceived problem go away? Who's the problem about? Is it perception that we're concerned about? So let's get into it. All right, welcome back, everybody. We've all seen these headlines about cleaning up our streets, but lately the Trump administration has done something that even I didn't think they would do. They put a target on the back of a very specific group. Our veterans, in this case, our heroes, the people that we hold on these pedestals. And the fear that it raises with me is that if they're willing to put this target on the back of a group like our veterans, what does it mean for the rest of us? What does it mean for your son or daughter who may be struggling? And we're going to get into it. There's a new partnership that's been announced between the Department of Justice and the VA, the Veterans Administration, that's pushing for increased legal guardianships. Essentially, they're going to strip individuals of their right to choose where they live and how and when they get treated. And I'm not being hyperbolic. How do you say it, Beck?
Hyperbolic.
I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. That is what the proposal calls for. The question becomes, is this a lifeline to our most vulnerable, or is it really a fast track to institutionalization for people that we don't want to see on the streets? There was an article written, a really good article written by a woman by the name of Ellen Berry and a guy by the name of Jason DeParle. It was back in mid-March, and that's why the urgency of getting this out here, because I really reacted like viscerally to this. And the article it's in the New York Times. It's called VA Begins Drive to Put Some Homeless Veterans into Guardianship. It was out on March 11th, 2026, if you want to look it up. And it really gave me pause. But before I get into that, I want you guys all to meet one of my favorite people, a friend for over 40 years.
Oof.
Now, I will slip up and call her Becky throughout this broadcast because I can't fix what I've known for 40 years. And I know that in the real world now she's called Rebecca. So the attorney Rebecca Iantuonni joins me, and I couldn't be happier because She is somebody that I look up to. I always have looked up to since we were teenagers, and look up to now in terms of what she does as a profession and who she's become, and just she's just an all around great person. So, what are you doing with yourself these days, Beck? Who you
Uh,
working for? Who's working for you?
Not enough people are working for me, Michael. Um, Thank you. That was such a nice introduction, and I feel the same about the work that you've done over the years too. And it's just so I am a lawyer in New Haven. I am a partner in a large law firm, D. Pitney, and my practice is focused on special needs planning, but in the context of really, any type of disability planning, folks with any kind of special needs. I do a lot of sort of medical legal partnership work where we introduce the legal assistance into the medical environment with the idea that, if you can address some of these social determinants of health with folks, you can actually improve health outcomes. So there's a vast array of stuff that we're able to do in this context. And like you, I had my practice start in the early days in serving as court-appointed conservators and guardians. And so this has always been an issue, a topic that's close to my heart, and really also um, uh, alights a visceral reaction like it did for you. So when you raised this article, I was super concerned about it as well for the reasons that you're talking about. And just kind of what the messaging is that we're putting out there is almost sort of the baseline attempt, or the baseline reaction to a problem, in quotes, that is not necessarily a problem that gets solved with this idea that has been thrown out there of, hey, we're going to take away your autonomy and your rights, and we're just going to make you take these services that have not worked on a voluntary level. So we're going to force them on you and see if that works.
And the degree to which that can be done is completely suspect, and we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yes, folks, buckle your seatbelts. It's just crazy to me that we started out together in high school, and here we are all these years later, and um, we're both interested in the same thing. It's just
Yep.
crazy how that our paths divert, re emerge together.
Yeah.
And yes, I am already scheduled and scheduling Becky to come back and talk to us about special needs planning, because that's a really important topic that I hope everybody that's listening or watching has considered and has given some thought to. So we will be hitting that record button maybe even later today. Who knows? Um, all right. So what I'm going to do during the course of this discussion, because I think it's that important, is I'm going to actually read from this article,
Mm.
and to make life easy for everybody, I will put a printed version of the what I'm reading, a caption on the screen if anybody wants to read along. But that way we can know the context for what we're discussing with in this regard. So I think what Rebecca is saying and what I'm saying is that we've been practicing for 30 years. We've been in the mental health field. We've been in this part of the industry. We've acted as conservator for hundreds of people. We planned with thousands of people.
Mm.
Um, the fine print of this article really raises alarms for me, because rather than taking a little scalpel to an issue, as Rebecca points out, we're basically taking a sledgehammer to our homeless veterans, and we are targeting them, and you will hear this in
Yep.
this article. So let's start there with the homelessness issue. And folks, I don't know how to say this any clearer than this. Homelessness is not a disability.
Right.
Period.
Oh,
Stop.
so true.
So let me read this. Okay, it says the Trump administration on Wednesday announced a new effort to initiate legal guardianship for hundreds of veterans, including some who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. And that could be used to force more of them into involuntary or institutional care. So here's the issue with that. This rhetoric links homelessness to the need for guardianship. It
Yeah.
links automatically. It says that homelessness means you need care, and we can force this care upon you. So
Yeah.
let's talk
Right.
about that first. Let's talk about that first, Beck, in terms of homelessness equaling incapacity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's not even, I mean, I think it even goes like almost a one step further. It's saying like homelessness equals like involuntary institutional care. It says it in the article. Like you're homeless, so you have lost all your ability to make any decisions, and you now have to subject yourself to, or not even subject yourself, you are going to be subjected to this involuntary process, and you're going to end up in institutional care because you no longer have the right to make decisions over yourself, which is
Because you're
just
homeless.
because you're homeless, period, full stop.
Yeah.
Like that's
Well,
it.
and I'll push it one step further. The thrust of this initiative, which they're calling, it's
Project Safe Harbor, Project Safe
Project
Harbor.
Safe Harbor,
Yeah.
because so with this initiative, you are basically homeless. Oh, and by the way, you're also a veteran. If you match those two criteria, you now get to go into we're gonna put a target on your back, as I said earlier, and you have the risk of being institutionalized because you meet those two criteria. So
Yeah.
are we running the risk here of creating basically institutionalized? Are we institutionalizing poverty here? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
I mean, I think that the message is too, it's like, thank you for fighting for our freedom. Now we're going to take yours. I mean, I think that's the dangerous. That's one message that I will never stand by. Like I could never let that be a message. Like my feeling is like, thank you for fighting for our freedom, even when you may not have agreed with the cause, but you did it because you stand so much for the US. And how do we in turn support you? What do we do for you? It's certainly not locking you down in an institution just because you can't locate suitable housing. I mean, it's just madness, I think. And the fact
Well,
that
it's
it's
just
gained any traction
it's
is,
scary, and I
yeah.
think that. And by the way, I'm going to steal that line of yours. Just
Okay.
saying, because this is the Holding It Together kind of podcast, and I am your host, Michael Macniak, and therefore I think that I have the right to be stealing the intellectual property we're
There
talking
you
about.
go.
Mhm. Um, so you brought up something that I wanted to talk about, but you brought up so many points right in there, and it was just I was so hit with that. Thank you for fighting for our freedom. Now we're going to take
Take
yours.
yours.
It's so strong. Um, and my son is in the military now. I don't know if I told you that, but yeah, he's 22
No.
years old. He's in the Air Force and
Oh, wow.
loving it. He's doing really well, and
Yeah.
so
Well,
it
thank you to him for fighting
yeah,
for our freedom. Seriously, like that is
right,
that's
right.
huge.
Let's now. So I hope that people that are listening can understand not only how this affects the homeless, not only how it affects our veterans, but also if we're now saying that because you're homeless, because you're um, a veteran, we have the ability to come in and institute these new policies. One thing that we need to point out is the link between homelessness and mental illness, which does exist. We need to point out the homelessness versus criminality, which does exist. I think the number is somewhere like 40% people who are homeless are 40% more likely to engage in criminal behavior than those who are not. So I want to make sure that we point out all sides of that. And I don't know, do you have a feeling for what the number of people who are homeless are also struggling with mental illness is?
I don't know the percentage, but I know that it's pretty significant. I will say too that there's an agency here in New Haven that I've worked with closely, the Fellowship Place, and they deal with these exact issues with homelessness and mental health issues, and sometimes a comorbidity of substance abuse, which, is not an uncommon factor. But, I think it's interesting because when you talk to a lot of the agency social workers and team there, they will say most people that are homeless, most people that you see or that are panhandling or, on the streets and stuff, that they're known to an agency and that they've decided not to take those services. So they're if you can say they're homeless by choice, but like they've been offered something, and they've chosen not to. So I think that is, and of course that raises the question of like, well, can they really be, exercising a choice? Like who would choose homelessness, I guess, is like what the judgment call is that we're making, right? Like we're saying, like, how can you, that's got to be your mental illness speaking that you don't want to take services, because like who in the right mind would want to sleep on the green in New Haven, and I think that's what's scary about this potential, this potential program, Project Safe Harbor, is like it's going to go in and it's just going to say, like you said before, 2 criteria: you're homeless and you're a veteran. Oh, you meet our criteria. Like,
Right.
get in the
And let's
back,
get
get
into
in
that
these.
because that's basically the federal government and the VA, which are both federal,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah,
coming in and saying, guess what? We're going to change what the law says.
yeah.
And now this is our only criteria. We don't have to meet gravely disabled, danger to
Nope,
self or others, et cetera, et
nope.
cetera. So we have this overreach that I'm concerned about where and I don't know why this should surprise me or anybody else at this point in time that we're seeing under this administration the willingness for the federal government to overstep its bounds and get involved with state rights and what the
Yeah.
state would normally have. Because let me read again from the article. Under the new arrangement, the Justice Department would give officials at the Veterans Affairs Department authority they currently lack to initiate guardianship proceedings in state courts for veterans who have no family and are unable to make their own healthcare decisions. Well, now
I mean,
I think we just added 2 more criteria, didn't we? Now you have
well,
to have no family and you've got to be unable to make your own healthcare decisions. But the feds are going to give the VA the ability. They're going to somehow wave a magic wand and say that you have the ability to go in there and do this.
Well, and how do you know somebody doesn't have the ability to make their healthcare decisions unless you've adjudicated their capacity? I mean, like that's the bigger thing. Like we're giving them authority they don't have. Well, I wonder why you don't have that authority. You don't have that authority because who the hell are you to make this decision?
But
Like,
I would also push back on that because, and I speak around the country, as you know,
yeah,
and I do a lot of talks with people who are involved with guardianship, conservatorship, and we call it
yeah,
conservator in Connecticut. They call it guardianship
yeah,
in the vast majority of states. And I don't know of anywhere where a veterans administration who theoretically is an interested party, right? A social worker, a lead social worker or administrator at the VA, hospital, or wherever would have the authority or the ability to go to our local court and say, hey, we really
yeah,
think this guy needs a fiduciary of some kind.
right.
Am I wrong? I mean, that was the first I jumped. I was like, this is crazy. Of course, they
No.
have authority.
Right. Right. No, I mean, absolutely. I think that goes back to sort of the fundamental concern here is like, this just takes away due process. Like it completely eliminates due process, completely eliminates. I mean, aside from the whole voluntary and the other criteria and stuff, like one of your fundamental rights is due process, and so this just says, we have determined, we some governmental agency, working in conjunction with another governmental agency, have decided that, where we have we have no jurisdiction or no authority over this, we are now going to decide that you cannot even avail yourself of these due process rights that you are constitutionally guaranteed because, we have decided that sitting here, that you're homeless, you're living on a church porch,
And you're a veteran,
and you're a veteran,
and you don't
and
have a family.
we can't track down your family,
and
and
and you we
how
and we
do
think
you,
how are they going to do this? I mean, how are they
I
going to move
right,
this without
right.
having the due process that you're talking about? How can they possibly then say, we've determined you're homeless, we determined you don't have a family, we determined you're unable to make your own
Yeah,
health decisions? I could see how they could figure you're a veteran, but all those other
right. Yeah.
things would require some kind of adjudication, wouldn't it?
Or yeah, some research. And
Some
like what about
inquiry.
HIPAA? Like what about HIPAA? Like how do you know somebody can't make their medical decisions without intruding on their HIPAA? So now are they because they're a member of the VA that like they can go into their VA files and like and look to
Well,
see what kind of decision making they've made or not made?
I would not be surprised, would you? If that,
No, no, of
I
course
mean,
not. But
look
I
at the
mean,
authority that the Social Security Administration gave back at the outset with the Elon Musk debacle and what was
right.
going on there. So,
Yeah.
anyway, all right, I want to
Well,
go back to the article because this doesn't
I just
end.
have I just have one other thing that I want to say too is that like you and I both know like there are lots of family. How do you define that somebody has no family? Because no family like there's absolutely no family living or no family that's willing to step in because we know that like our folks with severe mental health issues can exhaust family considerably and resources and everything, but they still have family, and many times that family comes back around at some point, and certainly when the person is in a crisis that you see family often pop back in and stuff. So like what does no family mean? Like that is
On
that's
the other side of that coin is that we also now do this investigation into what is our past preferences? What has our lifestyle been like? So
totally.
I live under a bridge, but you know what? Whenever I need a good meal or I need somebody to drive me to the doctor or whatever, I go over to Rebecca's
Yep.
house and she's my family. She's
Yep.
she's
Totally.
my right.
Yep.
So it's just
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm with you. So
It's
let me just
ick.
read.
Yeah.
Let's read from the article again. Back to the article. Jennifer Mathis. I hope I'm saying her right. And by the way, I did reach out to some of these people to join us today for this conversation. I did not hear back.
Hmm.
Uh, and I figured I gave him enough time. So Jennifer Mathis, the deputy director of the Bazelon, I think it's pronounced, the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law, said she believed that VA officials are seeking to have people placed under guardianship so they can have a person appointed who will force them into congregate or institutional settings when there isn't anything else available. If there are veterans sitting in VA hospitals unable to be discharged, as the Veterans Administration says, this Miss Mathis is saying, it is almost certainly because there are long waits for intensive community services or independent housing. She added that it is highly unusual for the Justice Department to take a role in guardianship proceedings, which are governed by state laws, which is what we
Yeah.
just said. And,
Yeah.
and to her point, and she finishes by saying, I don't know what their authority is. Um, the federal government has very little to do with guardianship, and they always have.
And they shouldn't have anything to do with guardianship of individuals.
Except to the extent that they're going to help us to get more beds and to get, as she says, right? Get more beds, get more funding, get more private institutions so that we can have a place for these folks to live if they so choose.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's a very different help. That's a very different assistance model than going in and just federal government saying you are don't have capacity to make these decisions. Coming in and identifying a systemic problem that we don't have enough housing for people, like, and so let's structure a program where we fund these housing supports, and then the states then figure out who gets it. It's like the very definition of Medicaid. Medicaid says,
Yes.
federal money comes in and then the states figure out how to use it. So they create their
Yes.
own programs and stuff. Like I'm all for that. Like that's where I want my tax dollars going. Like I will pay that all day long. But you start talking about like them coming in, the feds coming in now and taking personal liberties, personal rights. Like that's where it gets very scary, and that's what's a dangerous a slippery slope that we're creating if that passes.
No, it's slippery, it's greasy, it's
Yeah.
yucky, and we've been creating it for the better part of the last 10 years
Yeah.
because it's almost you get a feeling, and I'm sorry guys if this is just over the top beating you over the head with a political hammer, because I'm not trying to do that. I think that these issues are raised. The issues we're talking about here raise issues on a broader spectrum that really impact a lot of us. I mean,
Yeah.
this impacts my father, veteran, who, thank God, isn't homeless and is doing well, and he's 84 years old, and he's doing great. But this really can be seen. It's not far-fetched to see where this can go. I'm not
Hmm.
getting Orwellian on you or anything like that, but
Yeah.
but this isn't far-fetched, because you get to the point where you're starting to feel like it's a quid pro quo. If you want this federal money, then you got to do something back for me, and that is
Yeah.
going to your homelessness. And I just don't like that. So anyway,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
There's a discrepancy that I caught inside this article too, because I call it the 700 veterans discrepancy. All right, so let me read again. The initiative comes amid a push by the Trump administration to compel more homeless people into institutional treatment for mental illness and drug addiction. President Trump identified homelessness as a priority during his 2024 presidential campaign, and he brought it back up again last July in an executive order that called on agencies to use civil commitment to move homeless people into long-term institutional settings. Now, that movement, that missive by our fearless leader, did not seem to gain much traction back then. But it's the little nips, it's the little tucks
Right.
that they want to keep taking away, and the seeds that get planted. And this obviously was planted hard enough with you and I to get us riled up about it.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
so here. So the VA claims this is only for 700 veterans who are stuck in hospitals without families. So wait a second. Are we talking about homeless people, or are we talking about people, these 700 who are
Right.
stuck? It's like,
Right.
again, it's we're talking about one thing here, but don't look, because this is what I'm doing over here.
Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about one tiny little grain of population versus a broad systemic usurpation of your due process rights and your right to, I mean, people who read this should be like constitutionally outraged. Like, it restricts your freedom of travel. It restricts every single fundamental liberty that you are guaranteed as a US citizen, you
In
know.
theory, it can. In theory, you're
Yeah. Yeah.
not wrong. In theory, you are not wrong. And
Yeah.
we will talk about that in a little bit more depth in a minute, because um, I think there is a great misconception on the part of a lot of people who are listening right now in terms of what a fiduciary can or cannot do. I think that, they think it's a magic wand too. And
Yeah.
frankly, it isn't. And you and I both know that from 30 plus years of dealing with this. But so
Yeah.
here's my critique of this. And it goes back to what Miss Mathis said. Again, I hope I'm saying her name right. But if they're stuck in a bed in the hospital and we're worried about the money that's costing us, we should be putting money into creating more beds out in the community, especially
Totally.
for these folks, especially for the 700 that they've identified
Right.
as needing a place to go from the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah.
700, such a small number.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, so the other thing is like, okay, so this all passes and you now put these folks in, they hit the criteria. They don't have family, whatever that's defined as.
Yeah.
They're homeless, whatever that's defined as. They, have mental illness and stuff. And so you get them
Or no, they're
into,
unable to make their informed decision.
and they are unable to make
Okay.
their informed
Whatever
decisions,
that's defined as.
however they've determined that. So you get these people that have like hit these magic markers and you put them in the institutional setting, because apparently that's the only place we can have them live, because all of these four markers only set them up for living in an institutional setting.
Yeah.
Okay. So once they're there, like, do they ever get out? Like, or do they stay there for, like, once you're there, you're there? Like, and if you
And
get out, like, are you on a trial basis? Like, let's go see if you can have your freedoms back and see what you do with them. Or like, do we throw them
and
back
anybody
in?
that has any extensive experience with working with the mental health field um, and rightfully so. They always, I don't know that they always want to. They say that their goal is to keep people moving forward, right? That we're
Right.
not just gonna, and whether that happens or not, that's a whole discussion for,
Yeah.
that's why I
Another
have a
day.
job, right? That's why
Right.
both of us have jobs, I suppose,
Exactly.
because that doesn't always happen. But the idea is that we want to keep moving people forward, helping people to realize their next goals and dreams, and instead of just locking them away and throwing away the key. That's what we're
Yeah.
talking about here.
And I think also, it's not even, it doesn't even have to be like moving forward, because moving forward also means not moving back, not regressing. Like if you're keeping somebody stable, that is also moving forward. Like that is also progress in my mind anyway. If I have somebody who's stable
Sure.
and who's not like, volatile and having major issues like that to me. So I think like you also have to kind of think about what measuring putting the right bar there to measure
That's a great way to
against,
say it. You're right.
you
What is
know
our bar?
yeah,
Sometimes baseline is a great place to be.
right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. When somebody who hasn't had a baseline or has been so off that baseline and is now managing to be stable,
Right.
like in the minor, in a very minor way that we would consider minor, but it's huge that this person
Oh,
is actually like,
I,
it,
I,
even
I, I
even
tell the story. I tell the story all the time. When Angela first came to work with me, which has to be, my God, 20 years ago or so now, right? One of the very first cases that she had with me is we went out and we met with this gentleman and sat down at the dining at the kitchen table in the congregate living
yeah,
setting, and we had a conversation with this guy for 6, 7 minutes, something like that. And we're getting ready to leave. We're walking out, and the director of the program comes over to us and says, "You guys don't have any idea what a giant leap you just did." We're like, "What are
yeah,
you talking about? We just talked to the guy." She's
yeah,
like, "Yeah, we can't get that guy to come out of his room. And you just sat there and had a conversation with him for almost 10 minutes. And that,
yeah,
so again, where is our bar? What is a
right,
success? So this
yeah,
guy, VA press secretary, I feel bad for this guy because in the article, his name is Mr. Kasperowicz. Probably saying it wrong, but Mr. Kasperowicz, he contradicts this a little bit, which we know what happens to people who contradict the public policy.
yep,
He says that the primary focus of the current effort was not homeless veterans, but a group of around 700 veterans who are currently in VA facilities and have no family or legal representation to help them transition to a new setting. And there's the key word, transition. That's the word. We
right,
want to keep transitioning. So this guy, the VP press secretary, is kind of contradicting what the original Project Safe Harbor was aiming for.
right,
So I don't know. It's kind of all over the place, but that's where I came up with this number of 700. So you guys know that I'm not pulling this out of the air. Please go to the article. It's a short article, but it's well written in terms of it's not really taking a position. It's just saying, hey, here's some issues and tries to lay out the issues for you. My job and Rebecca's job is to point out to you the issues from the reality, from here's the real perspective. So
yeah,
you touched on this a little bit before, and we'd be remiss if we didn't bring it up because we are still dealing with the ghost of the early 80s deinstitutionalization concept that was really championed by Ronald Reagan and that administration way back then. The concept there, folks, was that we got all these people in institutions. We could save ourselves a lot of money if we get those people back out into our communities. I agree with that. Okay.
right,
Theoretically, I agree with that. The problem that we saw in this country with deinstitutionalization that we continue to see today, and this
yep,
goes back to the 80s, so 80 to 88, when I was in my formative years and I was a Reagan guy back then. By today's standards, I probably still would be. Um, but the problem with deinstitutionalization is that we did move the people out.
right,
We did close these institutions. We did think there was a better way. But when they got out into the community, the money that we had already earmarked for them, or half that money, or a quarter of that money, didn't go with them.
yeah,
So They didn't have a bed. They didn't have care in the community. So this is what deinstitutionalization has looked like. So critics of the policy, this is back in the article, critics say the policy shift raises significant civil liberties concerns, which is what we've been talking about, noting that in earlier generations, people with severe mental illness were routinely stripped of their legal rights and confined to state hospitals, which it sounds like,
Yeah.
so we're going back away from deinstitution.
Right.
Am I right back?
Yeah. Yeah. We're going full circle. Yeah. We're going away
Okay.
from it only to go right back to it. Yeah.
So we're going to take, and I guess the question is, well, do you think that that money is still sitting there then that we didn't spend in the community so we can just open up the doors of these institutions again?
No, I think we're spending $1 billion a day, not in the US.
Yeah, right.
Not on these veterans. We are spending it $1 million
Right.
a day on something else.
Yeah, now we got to
Yeah.
start. Now we're spending on creating new veterans.
Right. Yeah.
So
Which is an interesting thing too. So, I also think another inherent kind of conflict with this as well is like, so we have all these veterans that are over fighting, whether they agree with the war they're fighting now. I mean, we create these sort of trust issues, and we know veterans can have a trust issue. I mean, I think we all have a lot of trust issues, but so now you're taking a veteran who may already have a trust issue with the government because they've been put in places where they don't think that they belong, and now we're saying, okay, that same system now is going to have even more control over you. So, like,
when you get home, you
yeah.
better have a home to get home to.
And a family, and you better be able to make your healthcare decisions, and
yeah.
you better not be living on the streets, because then we are just going to, lock down hard on you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does. I didn't even think about that from that perspective, but that does, and it also makes me think, and I get this feeling a lot where we have this mindset of this utopian society that we had in the 40s and 50s, and we want to go back to that. But we're not really taking a look behind that curtain to see what did life really look like inside those institutions back then, and how you think that this is a better option is beyond me. So I want to get back to something that we touched on earlier, this blanket authority concept.
Yeah.
So in the article, they write that guardianship powers are broader and longer lasting than civil commitment. True.
Right.
And this is what we use to compel someone to accept medical treatment. Okay, guys, there's a difference between civilly committed and being medically forced to undergo treatment. So that's number one. They're two completely different causes of action that have to be brought separate from each other. Very often they're heard on the same day, but you would, number one, have to move to get somebody kept in an institution, because this isn't jail. And number two, if you wanted to force medications on them, involuntary medication also requires a hearing. So there's problem number one. All right, now we say guardians can control a person's assets, where the person lives, and whom he or she sees. I have a problem with that.
Me too.
They require the person to accept medical treatment. I have a big problem with that.
Me too.
Unlike civil commitment rulings, which expire after a specific time period, guardianships are intended to be durable. True, though they are revisited periodically and can be terminated or dissolved. That's true too.
Yeah.
But the reality is this, and you said it earlier, acting as a fiduciary, a guardian, a conservator, or any other kind of fiduciary is not a dictatorship.
Right.
If you think you can go into this and act like a dictator, you are losing right from the get-go, because without the cooperation of the individual and the team of people and the fiduciary, this cannot work. I mean, we've seen it. I've seen it in my career hundreds of times.
You're dead in the water. You're dead in the water. You're dead in the water with the person you have conserved, the conserved person. You are dead in the water with the team of professionals that are around them. Like you didn't, and I think you said it before as well, like where you're talking about, like, you always have to be cognizant whenever you're standing in as a fiduciary, you've been appointed as a fiduciary. You always have to be cognizant of how that person lived before. I remember I had this case like years and years and years ago. I was appointed as a conservator for a woman who was like 95 years old. And the son came out of the woodwork. Once I was appointed, the son came out of the work. And I was appointed because somebody had made an application because she, her mail was, kind of the traditional older folk, mail was piling up. Somebody called and I got appointed. And the son came in and he did nothing but challenge me, and he said, well, she should be swimming. She should be swimming every day. And I was like, I said, well, did she ever swim? Because I'm like, if she did, like, great, I can figure out a way to get her to the Y. Like, he's like, no, but swimming is really good for older people. And I was like, well, why should she start swimming now? Like, and that always stuck with me that, like, just because you think something is good, if that person has never done that before, like, why would that be a goal now,
Well, I use the analogy all the time that, there's 30 of us sitting around a room, we're setting goals for other people, and we say, I want Rebecca to quit smoking. Yeah, that's a great goal. That's an admirable goal for Beck. Well, guess what? She don't want to quit smoking.
Right.
So what's the chances that it's going to work, right?
Absolutely.
But
where does least restrictive come into all of this too? Like, how do we, that is always, I mean, we have to be operating on that. I mean, that was part of the deinstitutionalization as well, like getting somebody in the least restrictive environment. And we're always supposed to be looking at least restrictive, because of all of that stuff we were just talking about, due processing, our constitutional rights and our freedom to do this and our freedom to do that. Like, you start putting people in the highest, most extreme level of care that is for somebody who is like, when I think of like permanent institutionalization, I think of the person that is just like, like a 5-person hold that is like, is so volatile and exhibits such, outrageous behaviors that they can't live, they cannot be supported in any other setting other than where there's, 10 people on staff at all times. Like, that's what I think of when I think of institutional care.
Those are our forensic psychiatric unit. Right. The worst of the worst in our forensic psychiatric unit.
Exactly. And even some of those people, given the planning and proper attention and stuff, you might be able to get that person out in the community. You might be able to. I mean, sometimes you can't, but
And that's hopefully the goal here, but they don't talk about that. They don't talk about it. They're saying that basically guardianship and institutionalization is a fix-all that's going to get people off the streets.
Yep.
And it's going to allow us to say they can't have these visitors. We're going to force this medication. We're going to force them to live here. And guys, the law is pretty clear. We can't do that.
Right.
We can't do that, and we shouldn't be able to do that. So this article circles back on itself and does so intentionally. I hope so, because it really, to me, it's a call for resources, not restrictions. There's a guy by the name of Michael Figlioli. That's the only way I can see to pronounce it. He's the director of National Veteran Services for the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And he says, if thoughtfully carried out, guardianship could provide more structured support for vulnerable veterans, though he noted important considerations regarding veterans' privacy, potential implementation gaps, and the need for sufficient resources. So that's exactly what we've been saying. This guy is just doing what we keep saying. Then this Mark Takano, I don't know how to pronounce his name either. He's the top Democrat in the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. He's out of California. And his quote is, guardianship should always be a last resort. After all, less restrictive options have been exhausted to ensure veterans' rights are respected. Never mind veterans' rights, all of our rights.
Right.
And one of the things that restricts and busts up this fallacy that some people do have, that if we get a guardian or we get a conservator appointed, they're bam, it's like a magic wand, and now we could force people to do whatever. This concept that you just brought up, this least restrictive means of intervention concept, overarches everything.
Yeah.
So if you have the means to get yourself groceries, you have the means to get yourself fed, we don't have the right to come in here and get groceries for you and get you fed. That's a bad example, but you understand.
Right. Yeah.
I've said all along, guardianship, you said it earlier, it's a civil taking of liberties like nothing else we have in this country.
Yep.
Okay, this isn't going to jail. I guess there is civil jail. So other than civil jail, this is, going to jail for a civil crime I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Uh, Civil crime, is there such a thing? I don't know.
I don't
Anyway,
know.
anyway, conservatorship should not be taken lightly, but when you do use it in an appropriate clinical fashion as part of a comprehensive team, my work has shown, your work has shown over the years that it can be very effective, but it should be a last resort, not the first response to a housing crisis in our country.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the idea is that like the core idea is that we need more support. Don't need more control. You need more support in the communities and in the world. You don't need to just give people, some random people, more control over this population that meets these markers. It's just not. It's not it doesn't match up. It doesn't shore up in terms of what the problem is. Like I was just, my son who's autistic, and has cognitive impairments, he will have a reaction and I'll say, like, what size is your problem? Like, your problem is this big. And
Yeah,
how big is your reaction? Your reaction is this big. So your reaction should meet your problem. And this just seems like this is a huge reaction, especially if we're only dealing with 700 people,
right.
not only, I mean, like I take every life, as you do, we take them very seriously and want to protect the liberties of each person. But like, if we're talking solving for these 700 folks should not cause this type of reaction, because this is an extreme overreaction to a problem that seems to be, smaller.
I mean, the ways at the end don't justify the means.
Yeah, yeah,
And that seems to be a common theme that we discuss things very regularly now, unfortunately. And again, it's just a call for community-based services.
right.
If we want to honor our veterans, we don't
Yep,
start out by stripping them of their rights
right.
that you said they've been fighting for,
Yeah,
and dying for, frankly, for
right.
eons.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely, absolutely. And I think community is a really important piece of that too, because, if somebody wants to live in downtown New Haven, they should, community resources in New Haven should support them. You should have community resources is such a relevant factor, because what happens in, this institutionalization that they're talking about too, like, does everybody that gets institutionalized under this project, like, do they have to go to, like an institution? Like, I keep thinking of like the ICE situations, and like how the detention centers are in like Massachusetts. So anybody who gets pulled into ICE in Connecticut has to go to Massachusetts. Like, is
right.
that what's going to happen? Is you're going to go to
So
like,
they're going to go to Guantanamo Bay.
right, they're going to go to the closest institution for these, which may be, so if you had any person that didn't meet the family definition, but that could have been family, they're now not going to be able to go and see you, because you are in the system somewhere, institutionalized in
Well,
the system somewhere.
speaking of systems, this guy Stephen Idy, I believe is how you say his name. He studies homelessness at the Manhattan Institute. He cautioned that, and this the article again, guys. Caution that successful implementation could be challenging since it requires coordinated efforts among police officers, social
Mhm.
workers, clinicians, and lawyers, often employed by different levels of government or private. Uh, and it's hard to change big systems. And we're certainly not going to change a system by a broad brush stroke
Right.
against, never mind 700, but also the number of people who are veterans in this country, is relatively small given the number of people in the country, and the number of people who are homeless veterans is even smaller.
Right.
So, you know, y- you're really trying to tackle a mountain with rhetoric, and it scares me. And for those listening who are listening because they have family that they're caring for, this should be of concern. The idea that we can more readily take away a person's basic civil rights that are guaranteed to them, um, because of basically no real due process. should scare us, and it should be something that we really all balk about.
Yeah, and I think too, like to that point, like and just another kind of slant on it too, like we're talking about a federal solution to what is a state problem. And so what do you do? Like if you don't agree, if the feds put in this solution, like one of the things we like about the state police power is that if we don't like what the state is doing, the state police power is doing, we move to a different state. We can move to a different state that may have a different, like you may like the politics in Florida better, so you move to Florida, like wherever. But like when it happens federally, like you have to you have to become a refugee in another country,
Yeah,
because you can't escape. I mean, that's a federal law, and that's not what was intended, I don't think, when we by our system. I just don't think that was
no,
ever the intention, is that the federal
certainly
government
not.
would
And
rule the
then
people
you
like that.
also get into the idea of, are we furthering that gap between red and blue? And I mean, we've seen court orders that come out that are just I'm not going to follow that court order. The lessons that are coming out of our federal government right now are, if I don't like what you have to say, I'm going to just ignore it.
Yeah.
And I know Massachusetts has been given a lot of pushback on a lot of these federal mandates, and that remains to be seen how that shakes out. But yeah, I mean, and then when does it become a red versus a blue argument? And that it's completely not where this should be.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's not, it's a purely a people, and it is on the community, on the state level. I don't think that somebody in, like in a different community even should be making determinations over New Haven residents, because you don't know what's available here. You don't know who is here, what resources and what people do in New Haven. Like, it's so specific to each state that I think it's a very dangerous, I mean, for a million reasons that we've said, but just such a dangerous approach for the federal government to just come in and say, broad stroke, broad wipe of the brush to make this problem go away.
I think we beat the hell out of this horse.
Right. It's a good
All
one,
right.
though.
Well, thank you to Rebecca
Yeah.
Iantuonni for being here with me, and thanks, Beck. And you're going to have to be on here a lot with me, having these types of discussions. So,
Okay, Michael, I love it.
Okay, cool. All right. Before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a thought from the perspective of someone who sits in these courtrooms every week. In this Times article, VA Secretary Doug Collins said that the partnership is about ensuring timely and appropriate care. But here's the reality that the administration isn't mentioning. You don't need a guardian or a conservator to provide care. You need resources, you need beds, you need staffing. If a veteran is quote-unquote stuck in a VA hospital, it's rarely because they don't have a guardian to sign a paper. It's because there's nowhere for them to go that's safe or affordable or supportive. Stripping a veteran of their civil liberties just because the system's too broken to provide a community-based apartment is a moral failure. It's using the law to cover up a lack of funding. And if you take this out of the realm of how this impacts our veterans and impacts our lowly everyday citizenry, us, it becomes even scarier, because we don't have that hero status of veteran. We don't have the purse strings of the Veterans Administration, which, by the way, are enormous. Guardian should always be a last resort. This isn't it's not a shortcut for some kind of urban renewal or a way to clean up our street corners. These men and women fought for our freedom. The very least we could do is protect theirs. Thanks for joining me on the Hold It Together podcast, holding it together kinda, as I say. Let's keep fighting for the 95% of the homeless population this plan ignores. And let's ensure our veterans get the care they earned. Let's keep demanding that care actually looks like a home, not a court order. I'll see you all next time.